Ever since I discovered Letterboxd, the world of movies and the love of keeping movie diaries grew and grew. With this video, I wanted to reflect on my Letterboxd stats for 2023. In years past, I tried to make certain actors or directors my most watched of that year. In 2023, I had no goals for that. I wanted to see who naturally emerged to the top. Let's start with most watched actor, which turned out to be Randy Quaid. I ended up watching 7 movies with him in it. The first being a rewatch of What's Up, Doc?, which he has a very small part in. Overall, it was a great rewatch, and I was really able to pick up on a lot of the fast-moving dialogue. Next was Lolly Madonna XXX. I wanted to watch this because this is from the director of the fantastic Vanishing Point. Overall, I thought this movie was just kind of okay. I can understand somebody loving it, but the ending didn't really work for me and ended on an anticlimactic note in a very unsatisfying way. Next was Cold Dog Soup, which is an all-in-one-night movie. I've mentioned this one before, and I still stand by that Randy Quaid is the best thing about this movie and gives a really great comedic performance. Then I watched The Last Picture Show, which was a huge scratch off my watch list. Then a rewatch of Midnight Express, which I had seen a long time ago, and I think Quaid is fantastic in this movie. Even though he's not in it a whole ton, he makes such a memorable character and really plays against type throughout the entire thing. The last two were rewatches of National Lampoon's Vacation and Christmas Vacation, which are always fun movies to revisit, and Quaid is just perfect casting in both of them. Now for my most watched director. This is a 3-way tie between Abel Ferrara, Martin Scorsese, and Larry Cohen. With Ferrara, I started with Fear City, which is a really grimy 80s movie that I really enjoyed. Then I watched Miss 45, which basically increased the grime level and was even better. Then I saw Bad Lieutenant, which increased the grime level even further, and is a movie that I absolutely loved and was one of my discovery picks of the year. For the Halloween season, I then watched The Addiction, which is probably his most subdued movie I've seen. That is, until a sequence towards the end, which just ends in blood-soaked bonkers chaos. Then I ended it with R. Xmas, which I honestly wasn't the biggest fan of. It's definitely a movie that I can see having its fans, but it just didn't really grab me throughout. With Scorsese, I started with a rewatch of Cape Fear. I hadn't seen this in a long time and was definitely more familiar with the Simpsons parody with Sideshow Bob, but this rewatch really showed me how fantastic this movie is. Not only from the great performances across the entire board, but also the ever-constant moving camera that Scorsese uses, which I just cannot get enough of. Then I saw Killers of the Flower Moon. I know this movie has its detractors, but this really clicked with me and I absolutely adored it. Then I watched an earlier Scorsese movie, Boxcar Bertha. You can really see in this movie what Scorsese would eventually go on to do. But I do think this is probably his weakest movie. Not to say that it's bad, but with his incredible filmography, this is probably towards the bottom. But it does have an amazingly shot shootout towards the end. After that, I rewatched The King of Comedy. I remember when I first saw this was still one of Scorsese's least known movies, but definitely over the last 5 to 7 years has grown into one of his most celebrated, and there's a reason why. Because it's just that good. I loved it more with every rewatch. The last one was a rewatch of my personal favorite Scorsese movie, and if I had a top 10, one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time, that movie was After Hours. Right off, it is the pinnacle of the all-in-one-night movie, and one of the best movies where it truly makes you feel like you've been on this long night's journey where you're tired and delirious. And finally, with Larry Cohen, I started with Cue the Winged Serpent, which is both a great New York movie and a great monster movie. Then I saw It's Alive 3, Island of the Alive, which is one of the most bonkers movies I've seen in a while, with a very underappreciated performance by Michael Moriarty. After that, I saw Bone, which is worth seeing just for Yaphet Kotto alone. I followed that up with Black Caesar, which is a really entertaining 70s crime blaxploitation movie. And I finished it off with A Return to Salem's Lot, which is probably my favorite of the movies of his that I saw all year. I had no expectations for this movie, but was blown away of how fun it was. As for the first and last movies that I watched, I started 2023 with the comedy Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, which I thought was a really good way of starting the year. It's probably the best parody of the 40s noir genre that I can think of, with the perfect performance by Steve Martin. Then I ended the year with one of my favorite genres, the 70s action thriller with Moving Violation. It was exactly what I was looking for. For the first hour of the movie, it is one long chase scene, which I really think should have been the entire movie. The car chase itself is wonderful, but it pales in comparison to the two best car chases I saw all year, from Fear is the Key and Terror Squad. As for my least known movie, that title goes to a movie called Twice Under, which was shot entirely in Indiana. I don't really want to touch on this movie quite yet, and rather save that for the next part in my Midwest movie video. The last thing I wanted to do with this video is to talk about some of my rewatches. The thing I adore most about movies is that they change with you. Sometimes you can have the same opinion on a movie as when you saw it the first time, or sometimes a movie could be not as good from when you first saw it. But the best case scenario are those movies that get better and better every time you watch them. Fargo is one of those movies. I rewatched that earlier in the year, and it really did jump up there with some of my favorite movies. With this rewatch, I really clicked into the relationship between Marge Gunderson and her husband Norm. They are probably my favorite Cohen brothers characters, and probably their sweetest. Napoleon Dynamite was such an interesting rewatch because I had seen it a number of times as a kid, but I rewatched it in a packed theater on 35mm, and this movie kills with an audience, and that laughter of the entire audience is incredibly infectious. Next, I was also able to rewatch the movie Demons from 1985 in a packed theater with Claudio Simonetti performing the score live. I cannot explain how amazing this experience was. All I can say is that this is the ultimate way to watch the movie, which is relentless. Once things start to turn, the pace never lets up, and that score is just an all-timer, and it feels like the movie was built to be shown live, because there are certain beats where that music kicks in and it is just enthralling. And the concert setting of playing this movie live in a movie theater, it's one of my favorite experiences with movies ever. I rewatched a number of my all-time favorite movies this year. Jaws, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, After Hours, Sorcerer, but there was a movie this year that I rewatched that I think has climbed the ranks as one of the all-timers for me. I rewatched it at the most perfect time of the year, Christmas, and the atmosphere in this is just the greatest for it. That movie is Eyes Wide Shut. I still remember when I first watched this movie. It was around 10 years ago, and I was glued to the screen throughout the entire thing. I had rented it from a local movie rental place, and about halfway through, when Tom Cruise's character gets to the mansion, the disc that I was watching it on started to freeze, to the point where I couldn't even continue the movie. I rushed out and immediately checked all the local stores to see if they had it, and to my luck they did, and I was able to finish it. That whole first viewing is such a wonderful memory to me, and I love remembering just how into the movie I was, and how much the creeping horror of the entire movie was like. Upon this rewatch, it's even better and might be my second favorite Kubrick movie behind Doctor Strangelove now. And to finish these specific movies that I rewatched that I wanted to reflect on, I rewatched Babylon, probably one of the most divisive movies of 2022. I saw it earlier this year and was completely taken by the movie. Even though that it was heavily influenced by Goodfellas and especially Boogie Nights, I think it comes into its own. I rewatched this movie towards the end of 2023, and this movie worked for me so much more the second time through and has so many incredibly rewatchable sequences throughout. So those are some of my stats for 2023 that I wanted to touch on. This video might be kind of all over the place, but when you're looking at numbers and different stats throughout the year, I think it's kind of fitting. All right, see you later.